Restaurants would shut down if they didn't have a big television set. Nobody would go out to dinner. And then people were having parties, Dallas parties and so forth.
Larry Hagman wasn't just J.R. Ewing on TV. He became him in real life, manipulating executives, hiding dangerous secrets, and risking it all in a battle that could have destroyed Dallas forever. But the truth about how close he came to being fired is something fans were never supposed to know. Before Larry Hagman became television's most notorious villain, he was known for something completely different, playing the bumbling astronaut Tony Nelson in the lighthearted sitcom I Dream of Jeannie. For nearly 5 years, viewers saw him as the clean-cut, wholesome, and slightly goofy love interest of Barbara Eden's magical Jeannie. Nobody watching that show could have guessed that this same actor would later embody one of the coldest, most ruthless characters in television history. In fact, when Hagman first auditioned for Dallas, the producers weren't even sure if he was the right fit. They imagined J.R. Ewing as slick, charming, but not necessarily larger than life. Hagman was about to change all of that. The truth is, Hagman didn't just play J.R., he reinvented him. Early drafts of the scripts painted J.R. as just another Texas businessman with a shady streak. But when Hagman stepped onto the set, he infused the character with a devilish grin, sharp wit, and an almost gleeful cruelty that made him magnetic. Viewers didn't just dislike J.R., they couldn't take their eyes off him. Hagman's performance turned what could have been a one-dimensional villain into the heart and soul of Dallas. Suddenly, the show wasn't just a family drama. It was a battle between good and evil, with J.R. pulling the strings. Behind the scenes, Hagman was keenly aware of the power he was creating. He knew that every smirk, every sarcastic line, and every scheming glance was drawing people deeper into the story. The network noticed too. Ratings spiked whenever J.R. was at the center of an episode. Even though Dallas had a strong ensemble cast, it became clearer by the week. Larry Hagman wasn't just another actor on the show. He was the show. This transformation was shocking not only to audiences, but also to the executives at CBS, who realized they had accidentally unleashed a television phenomenon. But with fame came leverage, and with leverage came problems. Hagman wasn't just satisfied with being a star, he was ready to rewrite the rules of how stars were treated. But little did anyone know, Hagman's rise as J.R. Ewing was only the beginning of a behind-the-scenes war that would nearly cost him his job. When Dallas premiered in 1978, it wasn't expected to be a cultural earthquake. The show was marketed as a simple primetime soap opera about a wealthy Texas oil family. But within just a couple of years, it grew into a worldwide obsession. At the center of it all was Larry Hagman's portrayal of J.R. Ewing, the charming villain people loved to hate. Every time J.R. plotted a takeover, betrayed his own family, or outsmarted his enemies, audiences couldn't look away. He wasn't just another TV bad guy, he was the bad guy. By the early 1980s, Dallas wasn't just successful in the United States, it became a global sensation. In nearly 90 countries, audiences tuned in to see what J.R. would do next. At its peak, the show pulled in an estimated 90 million viewers for the legendary Who Shot J.R. cliffhanger. That single storyline became the most talked-about mystery in television history. Newspapers printed theories, talk shows debated suspects, people placed bets in Vegas. J.R. Ewing wasn't just a character. He had become part of the cultural fabric. But behind the glitz and glamour of the show's success, something more dangerous was happening. As the ratings climbed higher, Larry Hagman realized just how much power he had. Without J.R., there was no Dallas. Viewers weren't tuning in for the other Ewings. They wanted to see the ruthless oil baron they loved to despise. And Hagman knew it. He started to test his boundaries with the network, pushing back on long hours, rewriting his lines, and demanding more creative freedom. What began as small acts of defiance soon escalated into something much bigger. The cast and crew whispered about how Hagman's ego was growing along with his fame. But it wasn't just about ego, it was about leverage. Hagman had stumbled onto a rare position in television. He was essentially untouchable. CBS executives were faced with a terrifying question. What if the man who made the show a global hit suddenly decided to walk away? And that's exactly what he was about to do. Because while the world was hooked on J.R.'s schemes on screen, Hagman was preparing his own scheme behind the scenes. a contract negotiation so shocking it nearly got him fired. By 1980, Dallas was at its peak, and Larry Hagman was the undisputed star. But while the show looked unstoppable on screen, the truth behind the scenes was far messier. Hagman's contract was set to expire, and CBS assumed it would be a routine renewal. After all, who in their right mind would walk away from the biggest show in the world? But Hagman wasn't just anyone. He had studied J.R. Ewing so closely that he had started to think like him. And just like J.R., Hagman was about to play a dangerous game of high-stakes poker. Instead of quietly signing his renewal, Hagman shocked executives with an outrageous demand. He wanted a salary increase that would make him one of the highest-paid actors in television history. At the time, most TV stars earned respectable but not outrageous paychecks. Hagman, however, wanted millions, not just per season. He wanted $100,000 per episode, an unheard-of number in 1980. And he wasn't bluffing. He told the network point blank, "If I don't get what I want, I'm gone." At first, CBS thought he was joking. They figured the man who had played Tony Nelson, and now J.R. Ewing, wouldn't risk throwing it all away. But Hagman doubled down. He stopped showing up to rehearsals. He hinted to the press that he was ready to walk, and behind closed doors, he told executives that Dallas was nothing without him. And they knew it. The executives, furious at what they saw as arrogance, began discussing drastic options. Rumors swirled that producers were preparing to kill off J.R. entirely and shift the spotlight onto another character. Some even claimed they considered recasting the role, though fans today agree that would have been television suicide. Still, CBS believed they could call Hagman's bluff. The thinking was simple. No actor was bigger than the show. But in this case, they were wrong. Hagman had timed his rebellion with almost sinister precision. The network had already filmed the shocking "Who Shot J.R." cliffhanger, a storyline that left the world on edge. Without J.R., the cliffhanger was meaningless. If Hagman walked away now, the biggest TV moment of all time would collapse overnight. He had CBS cornered, and he knew it. The standoff turned into a battle of nerves, with neither side willing to blink. But what came next would push the network to the edge and change television contracts forever. The summer of 1980 became one of the most suspenseful moments in television history, not just for fans, but for CBS executives fighting for survival. On screen, the world was fixated on who had pulled the trigger on J.R. Ewing. Off-screen, the real mystery was whether Larry Hagman would ever return to play him again. The timing couldn't have been more explosive. Hagman's contract negotiations were happening at the exact same time the "Who Shot J.R." cliffhanger was dominating headlines around the world. The cliffhanger had been a stroke of genius. At the end of the season, J.R. was shot by an unknown assailant, leaving audiences in shock. Fans debated endlessly. Was it Sue Ellen, his bitter wife? Was it Kristen, his scheming mistress? Or one of the dozens of people J.R. had double-crossed? The question became so big that it made the cover of magazines, inspired parodies, and even entered political speeches. Everyone wanted to know who shot J.R. But inside CBS headquarters, the bigger question was, who controls J.R.? Without Hagman, the network was trapped. They had filmed months of television that now depended on his return. And if he walked away, the entire storyline, the one that had turned Dallas into a global phenomenon, would collapse. For months, CBS considered killing off J.R. permanently. Rumors spread through the industry that producers were drafting scripts to explain his death. Some insiders even whispered about the unthinkable, recasting the role with another actor. Hagman, meanwhile, stayed eerily calm. Like his on-screen alter ego, he knew he had the upper hand. He refused to cave, instead letting the pressure build until CBS had no choice but to bend. The longer he stayed silent, the more desperate the network became. With every passing week, millions of fans demanded answers, and those answers could only come if Hagman stepped back into J.R.'s shoes. In the end, CBS executives realized they were outplayed. Hagman had turned a fictional cliffhanger into a real-life standoff that captured as much attention as the show itself. They quietly reached a groundbreaking agreement with him, ensuring J.R. would survive the gunshot. What viewers didn't know as they eagerly waited for the reveal That fall was that the true battle, the one that nearly killed Dallas, had already taken place behind closed doors. But as Hagman celebrated his victory, another war was brewing. Because while money and power kept him on the throne, his personal demons were threatening to tear everything apart. Larry Hagman may have won the contract battle, but victory came with a dangerous shadow. Off-screen, his lifestyle was spiraling into something reckless, even self-destructive. Known among cast and crew as the life of the party, Hagman wasn't just a casual drinker. He was consuming alcohol at a level that shocked even Hollywood veterans. Stories circulated that he would start his mornings with champagne, switch to vodka by lunch, and keep the flow going late into the night. Some insiders claimed he was putting away 4 bottles a day, while still showing up to play JR with his trademark sharpness. At first, it was brushed off as eccentric behavior. Hagman was funny, charming, and seemed almost untouchable. But the truth was darker. His heavy drinking wasn't just a quirk, it was becoming a liability. On set, fellow actors whispered about moments where he slurred lines or stumbled through rehearsals. Directors worried his health could collapse at any moment. For CBS, this wasn't just about a star with a vice. This was about the backbone of a billion-dollar franchise showing cracks that could bring everything crashing down. Yet Hagman seemed to thrive in chaos. He used his unpredictability as leverage, almost daring the network to fire him. His bad habits became another weapon in negotiations. The message was clear. If they wanted JR, they had to take Larry Hagman as he was, flaws and all. And strangely enough, it worked. Producers tolerated his antics, terrified of losing the man who had made Dallas a global empire. But behind the bravado, Hagman was paying a heavy price. Years of constant drinking began eroding his health. Friends described him as having a permanent red flush, his hands trembling when he wasn't holding a glass. Though he laughed it off publicly, privately, doctors warned him that his liver was in danger. Hagman ignored the warnings, convinced he could outdrink and outlast anyone. This recklessness nearly destroyed him. His drinking would later lead to cirrhosis and, eventually, a liver transplant. But in the early 1980s, none of that mattered to him. He was untouchable, or so he thought. The combination of wild success, staggering paychecks, and destructive habits pushed Hagman into a world where he believed he was invincible. But while his vices fueled his legend, they also pushed CBS into a corner. And the deal they finally struck with Hagman didn't just save Dallas, it rewrote Hollywood history. By the fall of 1980, CBS executives had no choice. They were cornered by the very actor they once thought they could control. Larry Hagman had pulled off a masterstroke worthy of J.R. Ewing himself. After months of tense negotiations, Hagman emerged with a contract that stunned Hollywood. $100,000 per episode, plus perks and creative freedoms that most actors could only dream about. It instantly made him one of the highest-paid stars on television. And more importantly, it set a precedent that would ripple across the industry for decades. Up until then, networks held all the power. Actors were replaceable, shows moved on, and salaries were tightly capped. Hagman shattered that model overnight. He proved that a single star could hold an entire show hostage and win. Suddenly, other actors saw the blueprint. If you were essential to your show, you didn't have to accept the network's first offer. You could fight back, stall production, and force their hand. Hagman had turned the traditional power dynamic upside down. The fallout was immediate. Reporters called his deal Hollywood's most expensive gamble. Industry insiders whispered that Hagman had opened Pandora's box, giving actors a weapon they'd never had before: leverage. Future stars, from sitcom icons to dramatic leads, would use the Hagman playbook to demand bigger paydays. In many ways, the multi-million-dollar contracts we see today trace back to this one standoff in 1980. But even as Hagman enjoyed the spoils of his victory, there was an undercurrent of unease. Executives feared they had created a monster. Castmates quietly resented the gap between his paycheck and theirs. And Hagman himself, already spiraling into destructive habits, now had money and freedom to indulge every excess without consequence. The deal gave him everything he wanted, but it also removed the guardrails that might have kept him in check. Still, for the moment, Hagman was untouchable. The champagne flowed, the headlines praised him, and J.R. Ewing returned to television screens more powerful than ever. The cliffhanger paid off, the ratings soared, and audiences never knew just how close the character had come to being erased forever. But Hagman's victory came with a hidden cost, because while his contract cemented his place in history, his body was beginning to show the price of years of excess. And soon, the same man who had outplayed Hollywood's biggest executives would face a battle he couldn't charm or negotiate his way out of. Larry Hagman had won the battle for money and power, but behind the curtain his life was crumbling. The same charm that made him magnetic on screen was often clouded by his relentless drinking off it. Castmates would joke about his legendary tolerance, but the truth was no laughing matter. He was consuming alcohol at a level that left even seasoned Hollywood partiers stunned. Champagne at breakfast, vodka at lunch, bourbon by evening. It was constant. His liver was under siege, and so was his reputation. On set, Hagman's behavior became unpredictable. Some days he was razor-sharp, delivering JR's lines with the chilling precision audiences adored. Other days, he slurred, stumbled, or forgot entire pages of dialogue. Co-stars and crew learned to adapt, sometimes covering for him, sometimes rolling their eyes, but always knowing they needed him. He wasn't just another actor. They couldn't replace him, and he knew it. That invincibility fueled his recklessness. By the mid-1980s, the cracks were too big to ignore. Hagman was diagnosed with cirrhosis, a brutal reminder that his years of excess had caught up with him. Even then, he didn't fully slow down. Friends recalled him laughing about doctors' warnings, joking that he was pickled and could never die. But the truth was darker. His body was breaking down, and his survival would eventually depend on a liver transplant. Despite the chaos, Hagman never missed a season of Dallas. His presence was too valuable, and CBS couldn't risk letting him go. That loyalty, however, wasn't just about admiration. It was about desperation. Without JR, the show would collapse. So the network enabled Hagman's dangerous habits, turning a blind eye when they should have stepped in. In a way, the machine that Hagman had manipulated so brilliantly was now complicit in his downfall. But even as his health faltered, Hagman's star power never dimmed. Fans continued to idolize him, unaware of how fragile he truly was. To them, he was still the ruthless oil baron, untouchable and eternal. The irony was brutal. The man who had outplayed Hollywood executives was losing a much more personal war with himself. And yet, in his final act, Hagman managed to turn even tragedy into legacy. Because what he left behind wasn't just a legendary character, but a blueprint for how stars could rewrite the rules of television forever. Larry Hagman's story is one of television's greatest paradoxes. On one hand, he was the villain everyone loved to hate, a man who turned J.R. Ewing into a cultural icon and forever changed the way TV dramas were written. On the other, he was a star whose personal demons nearly destroyed him. But out of that chaos came a legacy that still shapes Hollywood today. The contract standoff that nearly got him fired is remembered as a turning point in television history. Before Hagman, actors were replaceable, salaries were modest, and networks held the cards. After Hagman, stars realized they could demand and receive unprecedented paydays if they were indispensable. Every blockbuster deal that followed, from sitcom megastars in the 1990s to the ensemble casts of today's streaming giants, owes a debt to the blueprint Hagman created. But Hagman's legacy isn't just financial. He redefined what it meant to be a TV villain. JR wasn't a caricature. He was layered, charming, and terrifyingly real. Viewers hated him, but they couldn't stop watching him. That kind of magnetic, morally complex character became the model for future television anti-heroes, paving the way for characters like Tony Soprano, Walter White, and Don Draper. Without Hagman's JR, television storytelling might never have evolved into what we know today. Off-screen, his life remained marked by contradictions. He was a devoted husband, married to his wife Madge for nearly 50 years, yet publicly wild and reckless in his habits. He fought his demons with humor, often making light of his drinking even as it nearly killed him. And when he finally received a life-saving liver transplant in the mid-1990s, he used his second chance to advocate for organ donation, turning his personal downfall into something that helped countless others. When Hagman passed away in 2012, the tributes poured in from around the world. Fans remembered the ruthless grin, the cowboy hat, the unforgettable laugh. Those who worked with him remembered something else. The man who stared down the most powerful network in television, risked it all, and walked away with the kind of victory JR himself would have admired. Larry Hagman wasn't just an actor. He was a game changer, a rule breaker, and a survivor. And his untold standoff with Dallas proves that sometimes the most shocking battles aren't the ones we see on screen. They're the ones fought in secret, where the stakes are higher than anyone dares to admit.